Hello and welcome dear students. As you can see on your screen, today we will be solving the CAT VARC section for the year 2020 slot 3. Okay, and without further much ado, I'll just go straight into my RCs that have been presented to me, and I will read the RC and solve the questions for you. Before we go any forward, I want you to know that solving a question or getting the answer of a question is not that important as much as knowing how to attempt the paper and what kind of questions to attempt in the exam room. Okay, you can find answers everywhere and anywhere, but the techniques that you have to learn and how to attempt the paper that you have to learn, that you will find in this video. All right, let's go ahead. I'm going to read the passage and then we'll solve the questions that follow. Mode of transportation affects the travel experience and thus can produce new types of travel writing and perhaps even new identities. From the first line itself, you can tell that the paragraph is about mode of transportation linked with travel writing as well as something to do about identities. We'll go ahead and read further to know what the paragraph is about. Modes of transportation determine the types and duration of social encounters, affect the organization and passage of space and time, and also affect perception and knowledge. How and what the traveler comes to know and write about. The completion of the first US transcontinental highway during the 1920s, for example, inaugurated a new genre of travel literature about the United States. The automotive or road narrative. Such narratives highlight the experiences of mostly male protagonists discovering themselves on their journeys, emphasizing the independence of road travel and the value of rural folk traditions. So it is relating the path or mode of transportation with how it affects the writing and how it affects the identity or sort of self-discovery of a person. All right. Travel writing's relationship to empire building as a type of colonialist discourse has drawn the most attention from the academicians. Close connections have been observed between European and American political, economic, and administrative goals for the colonies and their manifestations. In the cultural practice of writing travel books, travel writers' descriptions of foreign places have been analyzed as attempts to validate, promote, or challenge the ideologies and practices of colonial or imperial domination and expansion. Mary Louise Pratt's study of the genres and conventions of 18th and 19th century exploration narratives about South America and Africa, example, The Monarch of All I Survey trope, offered ways of thinking about travel writing as embedded within relations of power between metropole and periphery, as did Edward Said's theories of representation and cultural imperialism. Now the author is quoting these two authors and he is telling what they have written about and what they have written in the same topic. Particularly Said's book, Orientalism, helped scholars understand ways in which representations of people in travel texts were intimately bound up with notions of self. In this case, that the Occident defined itself through essentialist, ethnocentric and racist representation of the Orient. Said's work became a model for demonstrating cultural forms of imperialism in travel text, showing how the political, economic and administrative fact of dominance relies on legitimating discourses such as those articulated through travel writing. Feminist geographers' studies of travel writing challenge the masculinist history of geography by questioning who and what are relevant subjects of geographic study, and indeed, what counts as geographic knowledge itself. Such questions are worked through ideological constructs that posit men as explorers and women as travelers, or conversely, men as travelers and women as tied to the home. Studies of Victorian women who were professional travel writers, tourists, wives of colonial administrators, and other mostly elite women who wrote narratives about their experiences abroad during the 19th century have been particularly revealing. From a liberal feminist perspective, travel presented one means towards female liberation for middle and upper class Victorian women. Many studies from the 1970s onward demonstrated the ways in which women's gendered identities were negotiated differently at home than they were away, thereby showing women's self-development through travel. The more recent post-structural turn in studies of Victorian travel writing has focused attention on women's diverse and fragmented identities as they narrated their travel experiences, emphasizing women's sense of themselves as women in new locations, but only as they worked through their ties to nation, class, whiteness, and colonial and imperial power structures. See, when you encounter such paragraphs, you just have to stick with the keywords, okay? There are many themes covered through this paragraph, and I, as an instructor, as a trainer, can discern the themes, but when you are right there in the exam, under all the stress, you just have to focus on what the question is asking and what keywords you can relate it to, alright? So, we will attempt the first question. From the passage, we can infer that feminist scholars' understanding of the experience of Victorian women travelers is influenced by all of the following except, now you saw the keyword feminist scholars understanding, okay? You saw it and now you know which paragraph contained this and you will immediately go back to that paragraph and find your answer. It is saying that whatever that is being mentioned in the paragraph is aligned with 3 of these options and 1 does not align with that. So, we have to find that one, okay? We will immediately go back to our paragraph and see feminist geographer studies, it is there, alright. Now, we will skim through this paragraph in search of our right answer. Awareness of the ways in which identity is formed, yes. It is talking about the identity, one's identity when they start to travel, so this statement is right. Perspective that they bring to their research. What kind of perspective they are having if they are at home or if they are traveling. Women as travelers or see feminist perspective, alright. So, this is also a right statement. Knowledge of class tensions in Victorian society. Okay, nowhere in this paragraph there was nothing about class tension or the class struggle in the Victorian society. We are actually reading a paragraph about travel means and travel writings and what kind of impact it had on an individual. So, this one does not align. Still, we will read the fourth option, awareness of gender issues in Victorian society. Yes, in the last line only, through their ties to nation, class, whiteness and colonial and imperial power structures. They are talking about how there is a difference between men and women, how they are perceived in the Victorian society. So, yes, option number C or choice number C is the one that does not align with the scholars. So, C is your answer. From the passage, we can infer that travel writing is most similar to, see, these are the kind of questions that appear to be like small, and if you have given the time to read the paragraph, I think these kind of questions you should never skip. Okay, these kind of questions should be solved because they are generally high scoring. We will go through each option and see what kind of writing or what is the style of the writing. Okay, we are talking about travel writing. Travel writing. Political journalism, no, because it is not talking about any political development, neither is it, reporting any event, so it is not political journalism. Historical fiction, yes, it is based on history, but this is not fiction. It is based on true facts or true research that has been made by different writers or journalists. So, we will disregard this one as well. Autobiographical writing. If we were to talk about travel writing, it is happening when someone is traveling, okay. They are traveling and discovering themselves. And that is exactly what they are writing about in their writing. So, it is somehow related to their life only. So, yes, this may be autobiographical writing. Still, we will see the fourth option, feminist writing. It cannot be labeled as feminist writing because it is not doing anything to feminist movement, or it is not associated to females as such. Even there are male travelers who are writing about their own chronicles, so that won't be called a feminist writing. So option number C would be your answer. From the passage, it can be inferred that scholars argue that Victorian women experienced self-development through their travels because a lot was mentioned about Victorian women and how they perceived traveling, okay? And this is a big paragraph, and instead of going back to the paragraph, I'll show you the approach that you have to apply for solving such questions. They are saying Victorian women experience self-development. It is already inferred, okay? It is already assumed now, and we have to see why. So first option says their identity was redefined when they were away from home. Yes, it is mentioned in the paragraph that their identity was different at home and different when they were away from home. They were from the progressive middle and upper classes of the society. Nowhere it was described. Yes, it was said that it created a difference in their lives, but it did not explicitly mention that they were from this class. They were on a quest to discover their diverse identities. Quest to discover makes this statement wrong because they just went to travel. They did not know that they'll be discovering their identity, so it won't be called a quest. They developed a feminist perspective of the world. The paragraph is not particularly about feminist or feminist movement, okay? It is just saying how travel writing gets affected when modes of transportation changes or when one goes out of the house. So it is not really a feminist or feminism centric paragraph. So option A would be the most suitable one. American travel literature of the 1920s. Now they're talking about in the beginning or the second paragraph that when there was a transcontinental path developed in the 1920s, how did that affect the literature? And especially talking about American travel literature. Celebrated the freedom that travel gives. Yes, somehow it was there in the paragraph. Developed the male protagonist's desire for independence. No, there was nothing said about the desire as such. Presented travelers' discovery of their identity as different from others. See, if this statement was to be from this point up to this point, it would have been okay that yes, they discovered their identity, but not as different from others. It is not mentioned anywhere. No sort of comparison has been mentioned. Showed participation in local traditions. Yes, it also showed participation in local traditions. Now, out of these, we have to figure out which one is the best option, okay? So we'll just simply go back to our paragraph and see. Okay, such narrative highlights the experiences of mostly male protagonists discovering themselves on their journeys, emphasizing the independence of the road travel and value of rural folk traditions, right? So, celebrated, it is not mentioned anywhere, okay? This statement is already wrong. I told you why. Showed participation. It's not showing participation. It is only showing the value of local folk tradition. So, we are left with option number B, which is the appropriate answer. According to the passage, Said's book, Orientalism. Now, he's talking about the book that was mentioned known as Orientalism in the paragraph, and we'll see what exactly the question is asking. According to the passage, Said's book, Orientalism, explained the difference between the representation of people and the actual fact, demonstrated how cultural imperialism was used to justify colonial domination, argued that cultural imperialism was more significant than colonial domination, illustrated how narrow-minded and racist Westerners were. See, it did not talk about Westerners at all, so we will immediately eliminate this option, right? And now we'll go back and talk about the book mentioned here. Okay, Orientalism is not in this paragraph. Okay, fine. Theories of representation and cultural imperialism help scholars understand ways in which representation of people in travel texts were intimately bound up with the notion of self, in this case that the Occident refined itself through essentialist, ethnocentric and racist representation of the Orient. Okay. Demonstrating cultural forms of imperialism, right? Okay, so it is not saying anywhere that it was more significant. Okay, explain the difference between the representation of people and the actual fact. This statement may or may not be true, but it is at least not present in our RC. So we are left with option number B, and that would be the right answer. Are you noticing here that many a times in that moment, on the moment of panic, we cannot make sense of the entire RC, but how we can solve questions if you have highlighted the important facts and you know what the important keywords are. Okay, we have a new passage now. I'll go ahead and read this one. Although one of the most contested concepts in political philosophy, human nature is something on which most people seem to agree. By and large, according to Rutger Bregman in his new book Humankind, we have a rather pessimistic view, not of ourselves exactly, but of everyone else. We see other people as selfish, untrustworthy and dangerous, and therefore we behave towards them with defensiveness and suspicion. This was how the 17th century philosopher Thomas Hobbes conceived our natural state to be, believing that all that stood between us and violent anarchy was a strong state and firm leadership. See, here they connected strong state and firm leadership, that is the firm government, to human nature, right? They are connecting it to human nature, and two authors have been spoken about. But in following Hobbes, argues Bregman, we ensure that the negative view we have of human nature is reflected back at us. He instead puts his faith in Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the 18th century French thinker, who famously declared that man was born free and it was civilization with its coercive powers, social classes and restrictive laws that put him in chains. Alright. Hobbes and Rousseau are seen as the two poles of the human nature argument. See, Hobbes is saying that man needs a hold of a strong state in order to stay civil, right? And Rousseau is saying that man is okay, man is fine, but it is the civilization, it is the state that has put him in chains. So they are having contrasting view. It's no surprise that Bregman strongly sides with Frenchman. He takes Rousseau's intuition and paints a picture of a prelapsarian ideal in which, for the better part of 3 lakh years, Homo sapiens lived a fulfilling life in harmony with nature. Then we discussed agriculture, and for the next 10,000 years it was all property, war, greed and injustice. Now the author is justifying the view of Rousseau as well as Bregman. It was abandoning our nomadic lifestyle and then domesticating animals, says Bregman, that brought about infectious diseases. Abandoning our nomadic lifestyle brought about infectious diseases such as measles, smallpox, tuberculosis, syphilis, malaria, cholera and plague. This may be true, but what Bregman never really seems to get to grips with is that pathogens were not the only things that grew with agriculture. So did the number of humans. It's one thing to maintain friendly relations and a property-less mode of living when you are 30 or 40 hunter-gatherers following the food, but life becomes a great deal more complex and knowledge far more extensive when there are settlements of many thousands. So now the author is trying to explain that even though Bregman thinks that agriculture brought issues, but the issues were also exemplified or increased due to the increase in the number of human beings. Civilization has become synonymous with peace and progress and wilderness with war and decline, writes Bregman. In reality, for most of human existence, it was the other way round. Whereas traditional history depicts the collapse of civilizations as dark ages in which everything gets worse, modern scholars, he claims, see them more as a reprieve in which the enslaved gain their freedom and culture flourishes. Like much else in this book, the truth is probably somewhere between the two stated positions. In any case, the fear of civilization collapse Bregman believes is unfounded. It's the result of what the Dutch biologist Frans de Waal called veneer theory, the idea that just below the surface our bestial nature is waiting to break out. There's a great deal of reassuring human decency to be taken from this bold and thought-provoking book, and a wealth of evidence in support of the contention that the sense of who we are as a species has been deleteriously distorted. But it seems equally misleading to offer the false choice of Rousseau and Hobbes when clearly humanity compasses both. This is a good summary paragraph as well, because it is showing and drawing a contrast between Rousseau and Hobbes. The author has differing views from Bregman regarding. Now what Bregman was saying? Bregman was saying that man is fine when he is uncontrolled and uncivilized. The problem starts when we start relying too much on civilization. The role of pathogens in the spread of infectious diseases. A civilized society being coercive and unjust. A property-less mode of living being socially harmonious. The role of agriculture in the advancement of knowledge. Okay, Bregman's view, if we have to go and check Bregman's view, says that he has a pessimistic view of society. Okay, people are selfish, untrustworthy, dangerous, and therefore, okay. It is saying that man needs a strong state and firm leadership to stay at its place. But now, what the author is trying to say, I am trying to steer clear from the Bregman, Hobbes and Rousseau part so that I can actually see what the author was trying to say. It is still talking about Hobbes. Okay, Hobbes' ka point of view, we know about Hobbes' point of view. What Bregman never really seems to get to grips with is that pathogens were not the only thing that grew with agriculture. So did the number of humans. Okay. This is author is agreeing. Okay. A propertyless mode of, this is also author is agreeing, but he is not talking about a civilized society being coercive and unjust. He is not saying that. He is saying that we lie somewhere between that. He is not having that extremist or borderline view of the things. So option number B would be the most appropriate answer. According to the passage, the collapse of civilizations is viewed by Bregman as. Now you have to see what the point of Bregman was. Okay, Bregman. A sign of regression in society's trajectory, resulting from a breakdown in the veneer of human nature, a time that enables changes in societies and culture, a temporary phase which can be rectified by social action. This is nowhere mentioned, right? So we will disregard this option. Now we are talking about collapse of civilizations. In any case, the fear of civilization collapse, Bregman believes, is unfounded. It's the result of what the Dutch biologist Frans de Waal calls veneer theory. He's talking that civilizational collapse is the result of the veneer theory. Okay, there's a great deal of reassuring human decency to be taken from this. Great deal of reassuring human decency. That means collapse हो भी जाए, okay, society breakdown हो भी जाए, उसके बाद भी human decency would remain. So we're talking about resulting from a breakdown in the veneer of human nature, okay, a time that enables changes in societies and culture. यही वो कहना चाह रहे हैं कि reassure है कि human decency फिर भी आएगी, and even though society collapses, we can always rebuild something else. So option number C would be the right answer. All right. None of the following views is expressed in the passage except that. अब except as none of the following, 4 आपको options given है, ये बोल रहे हैं कि इनमें से कोई भी व्यू नहीं है पैसेज में एक्सेप्ट वन. सो वो कौन सा है? वी हैव टू फिगर दैट आउट. हॉब्स एंड रूसो डिसएग्रीड ऑन द फंडामेंटल नेचर ऑफ ह्यूमंस बट बोथ बिलीव्ड इन द नीड फॉर स्ट्रॉन्ग स्टेट. नो, Hobbes agreed in the need for strong state. Rousseau said that we do not need any kind of state at all. Bridgman agrees with Hobbes that firm leadership is needed to ensure property rights and regulate strife. No, Bridgman had a different point of view and Hobbes had a different point of view, so this will also be negated. The author of the review believes in the Veneer theory of human nature. The author is not believing, he is only quoting. So, we'll also disregard this one. Most people agree with Hobbes' pessimistic view of human nature as being intrinsically untrustworthy and selfish. This was mentioned in the first paragraph itself. Yes, which most people seem to agree. This is mentioned in your RC. Remember, you also always have to stick with what has been mentioned in the RC. So, most people agree with Hobbes' pessimistic view of human nature as being intrinsically untrustworthy and selfish. So, D would be your answer. Okay. According to the author, the main reason why Bridgman contrasts life in pre-agricultural societies with agricultural societies is to. जो contrast दिखाने का try कर रहे हैं, Bridgman बताने का try कर रहे हैं. Bridgman कौन थे जिन्होंने बोला था कि we will need a strong government to govern us. Why is he drawing a contrast? Advocate the promotion of less complex society as a basis of greater security and prosperity. No, वो तो कह रहे थे कि complex society और strong state होनी चाहिए. तो this option will be disregarded. Bolster his argument that people are basically decent, but progress as we know it can make them selfish. Okay, somehow this, let's consider this. Highlight the enormous impact that settled farming had on population growth. No, this population growth point was raised by the author itself, not the Bridgman. Make the argument that an environmentally conscious lifestyle is more harmonious way of living. See, nowhere environment was mentioned, so you will disregard this option naturally. So lastly, we are left with option number B, which may not seem like the right answer to you, but it is at least most appropriate out of these four. So while solving, just keep in mind that you have to put your biases aside and just focus on the main aspect or what is mentioned in the RC. Alright, we have our new passage before us. Let's go ahead. There is a curious new reality. Human contact is becoming a luxury good. As more screens appear in the lives of the poor, screens are disappearing from the lives of the rich. The richer you are, the more you spend to be off screen. The joy, at least at first, of the internet revolution was its democratic nature. Joy of internet revolution, its democratic nature. Facebook is the same Facebook whether you are rich or poor. Gmail is the same Gmail and it's all free. There is something mass market and unappealing about that. As studies show that time on these advertisement support platform is unhealthy. It all starts to seem declass, like drinking soda or smoking cigarettes, which wealthy people do less than poor people. There is a contrast happening here, that how much technology or how much screen reliance are these two class of people are having. The wealthy can afford to opt out of having their data and their attention sold as a product. The poor and middle class don't have the same kind of resources to make that happen. Screen exposure starts young. The children who spend more than 2 hours a day looking at a screen got lower scores on thinking and language test, according to early results of a landmark study on brain development of more than 11,000 children that the National Institutes of Health is supporting. Most disturbingly, the study is finding that the brains of children who spend a lot of time on screens are different. For the brains of children who spend a lot of time on screens are different. For some kids, there is premature thinning of their cerebral cortex. In adults, one study found an association between screen time and depression. Tech companies worked hard to get public schools to buy into programs that required schools to have one laptop per student. arguing that it would better prepare children for their screen-based future. But this idea isn't how the people who actually build the screen-based future raise their own children. In Silicon Valley, time on screens is increasingly seen as unhealthy. Here, the popular elementary school is the local Waldorf school, which promises a back to nature, nearly screen-free education. So as wealthy kids are growing up with less screen time, poor kids are growing up with more. How comfortable someone is with human engagement could become a new class marker. Human contact is, of course, not exactly like organic food, but with screen time, there has been a concerted effort on the part of Silicon Valley behemoths to confuse the public. The poor and the middle class are told that screens are good and important for them and their children. There are fleets of psychologists and neuroscientists on staff at big tech companies working to hook eyes and minds to the screen as fast as possible and for as long as possible. And so, human contact is rare. There is a small movement to pass a right to disconnect bill which would allow workers to turn their phones off, but for now a worker can be punished for going offline and not being available. There is also the reality that in our culture of increasing isolation, in which so many of the traditional gathering places and social structures have disappeared, screens are filling a crucial void. Okay, now coming to the questions. Which of the following statements about the negative effects of screen time is author least likely to endorse? Least likely to endorse का मतलब क्या है? Least related to your RC, related to passage. It can cause depression in viewers, okay, was mentioned. It increases human contact as it fills an isolation void. No, this statement is not sitting well, so will not consider. It is shown to have adverse effects on young children's learning. Yes, the author will agree. It is designed to be addictive. Which of the following statements about the negative effect of screen time is the author least likely to endorse? So option number B would be the right answer, that the author will not actually endorse this one because he is trying to say all these things except this one. So option number B would be your right answer. Let's go ahead. The statement, the richer you are, the more you spend to be off screen, is supported by which other line from the passage? Okay, studies show that time on these advertisement support platform is unhealthy. The richer you are, the more you spend to be off screen. That means you can control how and where to give your data, right? So this one, studies statement is not being related to it, so we'll cancel this one. Gmail is the same Gmail and it's all free. This one talks about the democratic nature. So this will also be disregarded. How comfortable someone is with human engagement could become a new class marker. Yes, it is talking about how class differentiation can be done about how comfortable they are with human engagement. Like if people have more screen time, they are not comfortable with human engagement. And who has more screen time? The lower class. Screens are filling a crucial void. This may relate to loneliness, but not exactly to this statement. So we are left with statement number C, and this is our answer in the case. Okay, going to the next question now. The author is least likely to agree with the view that the increase in screen time is fueled by the fact that least likely to agree. ऑथर का पर्सपेक्टिव याद रखना एंड जो ये ऑप्शन बोलने जा रहे हैं वो याद रखना. Screens provide social contact in an increasingly isolating world. Nowhere has this been mentioned, this particular thing. Okay. Some workers face punitive action if they are not online. Yes, this was mentioned in the paragraph. With falling costs, people are streaming more content on their devices. This is not related to your RC at all because it is not talking about content. There is a growth in computer-based teaching in public schools. Yes, this was also mentioned. So increased time is fueled by the fact. क्यों स्क्रीन टाइम ज़्यादा हो रहा है? ऑथर किस चीज़ पे ज़्यादा अग्री करेगा? If you go back to your paragraph, you'll see there is also the reality that in our culture of increasing isolation, in which so many of the traditional gathering places and social structures have disappeared, screens are filling a crucial void, right? So this one is not related, okay? This one is not related to the paragraph. This is not what author is saying. This is the reality in that case. So out of some workers face punitive action, this is also a reality. So after eliminating all the options, we are left with option number A, which seems to be the most appropriate answer. The author claims that Silicon Valley tech companies have tried to confuse the public. It was mentioned that tech companies are confusing the public. Why? Because they are saying you should use more and more screens and you should involve more and more screens and laptops in your curriculum for your students. But their students are going to schools which do not have screens. So they are trying to confuse the public. Promoting screen time in public schools while opting for screen-free education for their own children. Okay, we can consider this one. Developing new work efficiency programs while lobbying for the right to disconnect bill. No, they are not lobbying for the right to disconnect bill. Okay. Concealing the findings of psychologists and neuroscientists on screen time use from the public. They are concealing the findings, but it's not like they are making a fool of the public. So they are not confusing the public as such. Pushing for greater privacy while working with advertisement support platforms to mine data. Note, nothing is spoken about privacy or data mining, so we'll disregard this one. So most appropriate option would be option number A. Alright, let's go ahead. Okay, let's go through this paragraph and see what it has to say. Just a minute. Okay, let's go and check this question. I've been following the economic crisis for more than 2 years now. I began working on the subject as part of the background to a novel and soon realized that I had stumbled across the most interesting story I've ever found. While I was beginning to work on it, the British bank Northern Rock blew up, and it became clear that, as I wrote at the time, if our laws are not extended to control the new kinds of super powerful, super complex and potentially super risky investment vehicles, they will one day cause a financial disaster of global systemic proportions. I was both right and too late, because all the groundwork for the crisis had already been done through the sluggishness of the world's governments in not preparing for the great unraveling of autumn 2008, when was then and still is stupefying. Stupefying means shocking. But this is the first reason why I wrote this book, because what's happening is extraordinarily interesting. It's an absolutely amazing story full of human interest and drama, one whose byways of mathematics, economics and psychology are both central to the story of the last decades and mysteriously unknown to the general public. We have heard a lot about the two cultures of science and arts. We heard a particularly large amount about it in 2009 because it was the 50th anniversary of speech during which C.P. Snow first used the phrase. But I'm not sure the idea of a huge gap between science and the arts is as true as it was half a century ago. It's certainly true, for instance, that a general reader who wants to pick up an education in the fundamentals of science will find it easier than ever before. It seems to me that there is a much bigger gap between the world of finance and that of general public. The author is saying there is a much bigger gap. Instead of science and art, there is a gap between finance and normal general public. And that there is a need to narrow that gap if the financial industry is not to be a kind of priesthood administering to its own mysteries and feared and resented by the rest of us. He compared that if you want the financial industry to be like priesthood, where there are set of rules and nobody is allowed to know that rules, then yes, please go ahead like this. But he is saying that we have to fair this gap in order to not let financial industry become something like priesthood. Many bright, illiterate people have no idea about all sorts of economic basics of a type that financial insiders take as elementary facts of how the world works. Many bright, illiterate people have no idea of economic basics. I am an outsider to finance and economics, and my hope is that I can talk across that gulf. The author is saying that I am also not from that background, but I am hoping that I will walk and talk across that gulf. My need to understand is the same as yours, whoever you are. That's one of the strangest ironies of this story. After decades in which the ideology of the Western world was personally and economically individualistic, we have suddenly hit by a crisis which shows in the starkest terms that whether we like it or not, there are large parts of it that you would have to be crazy to like. We're all in this together. He's saying that Western world has an individualistic ideology, but due to the financial crisis unfolding, he has come to realize that we are in this together. The aftermath of the crisis is going to dominate the economics and politics of our societies for at least a decade to come and perhaps longer. Okay. Which of the following, if false, could be seen as supporting the author's claims? Okay, this is one of those confusing questions. First of all, you have been presented with 4 options, and the author is saying if the statement is not true or if the statement is false, then it should support the author's ideology. Okay, alright, let's see. The global economic crisis lasted for more than 2 years. The author has been researching, okay, for the past 2 years, but it has not listed anywhere. So we'll not take this option. The huge gap between science and arts has steadily narrowed over time. This is the author, that is exactly he's saying this. At the same time, if this statement was false, that means there was not like the gap is not narrowing, so it will not align with the author's thought. So we'll disregard this one. The economic crisis was not a failure of collective action to rectify economic problems. The economic crisis was not a failure of collective action. This statement is false. If then the economic crisis was a failure of collective action to rectify economic problems. Yes, the author is saying this in the first paragraph itself, that all the groundwork for the crisis has already been done through the sluggishness of the world's governments. So the author has already said this one, so option number C will align the most. Most people are yet to gain any real understanding of the workings of the financial world. This statement is automatically true, so if we have to reverse this or make it false, then it will not fit with the author's ideology. So option number C is your best option. Okay. Which one of the following, if true, would be an accurate inference from the first sentence of the passage? First sentence of the passage, let's go and check what the first sentence was. I've been following the economic crisis for more than 2 years now. The author's preoccupation with the economic crisis is not less than 2 years old. Yes, it was there. It is more than 2 years old. The economic crisis outlasted the author's preoccupation with it. No, it has not been mentioned anywhere. The author is preoccupied with the economic crisis because he is being followed. I mean, this is absurd. This has not been mentioned. The author has witnessed many economic crises by traveling a lot for 2 years. By traveling a lot, again, not mentioned. So, option number is your answer. See, these are the kind of like simpler questions that you are supposed to spot and solve to gain those extra marks. Okay. Which one of the following best captures the main argument of the last paragraph of the passage? What is the last paragraph of the passage? This one. He is saying that even though we have had an individualistic ideology, we are in this together, that we are not that alone after all. Whoever you are, you would be crazy to think that there is no crisis. He is not saying this. In the decades to come, other ideologies will emerge in the aftermath of the crisis. Maybe he wrote this somewhere, but this does not sit well somehow, but we'll still consider this later. The ideology of individualism must be set aside in order to deal with the crisis. Yes, he's talking about ideology of individualism, so we'll also consider this one. The aftermath of the crisis will strengthen the central ideology of individualism and the Western world. No. Will strengthen. No, it will actually weaken, because now we know that individualism ideology is wrong. So ultimately option number C is your best option and your answer. All of the following, if true, could be seen as supporting the arguments in the passage except. Now out of these 4 arguments, 3 are supporting the passage and 1 is not supporting the passage. So you have to figure out which one of these is not supporting the main idea of the passage. The story of the economic crisis is also one about international relations, global financial security and mass psychology. Yes, it is talking about what people think and how they are connected to financial security. So this will align with the author's view. Economic crisis could be averted by changing prevailing ideologies and belief. Yes, the main argument author is having is this only, that we have to switch to our ideologies. The failure of economic system does not necessarily mean the failure of their ideologies. No, the author is himself saying that we have a different ideology or different approach towards financial education. So we have to change that. So this will not align with the author's view. The difficulty with understanding financial matters is that they have become so arcane. Arcane means difficult to approach. So yes, it is difficult to approach because a lot of people do not know the basic terminology of the financial world. So out of these 4, only 1 argument is not sitting well with the passage, which is your answer. Okay. According to the passage, the author is likely to be supportive of which one of the following programs? Okay, now we have to see author is likely to be supportive of. Okay, so this may or may not be present in the paragraph, but you have to see if it wells with the author's ideology or not. An educational curriculum that promotes economic research. It is talking about economic research. The author is not talking about the research part. He is talking about the education part. So no, this will not sit well. An educational curriculum that promotes developing financial literacy in the masses. Yes, he is talking about we need to be financially educated. The complete nationalization of all financial institutions. No, nowhere the term nationalization was mentioned. So no. The economic policies that are more sensitively calibrated to the fluctuations of the market. Again, it's not talking about the fluctuations of the market, but the gap that people need to breach, that is between financial awareness and general knowledge. So option number B is the best answer. Okay, we've come to this passage and you have to choose the summary for the passage. Okay, I will also tell you how to choose a summary and discuss why the answer that we are presented with is the right answer. Brown et al. 2001 suggested that metabolic theory may provide a conceptual foundation for much of ecology. Just as genetic theory provides a foundation for much of evolutionary biology. One of the successes of genetic theory is the diversity of theoretical approaches and models that have been developed and applied. A Web of Science version 5.9. Thomson Reuters search on genetic plus theor plus evolve identifies more than 12,000 publications between 2005 and 2012. Considering only the 10 most cited papers within this 12,000 publication set, genetic theory can be seen to focus on genome dynamics, phylogenetic inference, game theory, and the regulation of gene expression. There is no one fundamental genetic equation, but rather a wide array of genetic models ranging from simple to complex with differing inputs and outputs and divergent areas of application loosely connected to each other through shared conceptual foundation of heritable variation. Alright, let's go through each option and decide which one is the best summary for our paragraph. Genetic theory has a wide range of theoretical approaches and applications, and metabolic theory must have the same in the field of ecology. Okay, it is including what is mentioned in the beginning of the paragraph. Genetic theory has a wide range of theoretical approaches and application and is foundational to evolutionary biology, and metabolic theory has the potential to do the same for ecology. Okay, it is mentioning half of the paragraph. Genetic theory provides an example of how a range of theoretical approaches and applications can make a theory successful. This is mentioning the major crux of the paragraph, but at the same time it is not talking about metabolic theory. Genetic theory has evolved to spawn a wide range of theoretical models and applications, but metabolic theory need not evolve in a similar manner in the field of ecology. It is changing the whole idea of the paragraph. So obviously this will not be our summary. So out of these two, the best option is option number B, because it is covering the whole aspect of the paragraph. Parajumbles is a question of parajumbles, and now we will solve this and I will tell you how and what approach to take. Alright. It has advocated a conservative approach to antitrust enforcement that espouses faith in efficient markets and voice suspicion regarding the merits of judicial intervention to correct anti-competitive practice. See, right before you have 4 sentences that have these 3-line worth of content in each of them. So instead of spending much more time here, you can go ahead, skip this one and attempt one with a simpler set of sentences, or maybe where the introduction or the conclusion sentence is clearly observable. Okay, instead of actually finding which one is the first or last sentence, you can simply skip this one. But since we are solving the paper, I'll solve this one. Many industries have consistently gained market share, the lion's share, without any official concern. The most successful technology companies have grown into veritable titans on the premise that they advance public interest. That the new anti-competitive risk posed by tech giants like Google, Facebook and Amazon necessitate new legal solutions could be attributed to the dearth of enforcement actions against monopolies and the few cases challenging mergers in the USA. Now we know that this statement is starting with that. So this is at least not our introductory sentence, right? The criterion of consumer welfare standard and the principle that antitrust law should serve consumer interest and that it should protect competition rather than individual competitors was an antitrust law introduced by and named after the Chicago School. As you can read out of these statements, this is mentioning something about antitrust law and how it was introduced. So this would be my introductory sentence. Next, I see in sentence number A that it is talking about the approach to antitrust enforcement. So, would be our next sentence. Now we are left with B and C. B is giving the example that how many industries have consistently gained market share, okay, and B is making a statement and C is giving the example of those companies. So B will be followed by C, and this is your right order. Alright, let's move on to the next question. Just a minute. Okay, you have to choose the option that captures the essence of the passage or the main idea. So you have to find the summary of the passage, alright. Aesthetic political representation urges us to realize that the representative has autonomy with regard to the people represented. But autonomy then is not an excuse to abandon one's responsibility. Aesthetic autonomy requires cultivation of disinterestedness on the part of actors, which is not indifference. To have disinterestedness, that is, to have comportment towards the beautiful that is devoid of all the ulterior references to use, requires a kind of aesthetic commitment. It is the liberation of ourselves for the release of what has proper worth only in itself. See, this paragraph is what I call an abstract paragraph, because a lot of new keywords, a lot of new concepts are being introduced without being defined much. But luckily, or I would say fortunately, we only have to find the main essence or the summary, and for that you can just choose the option which contains the most of the keywords or which contains most of the ideas that have been displayed in your paragraph. Disinterestedness is different from indifference, as the former means a non-subjective evaluation of things, which is what constitutes aesthetic political representation. Aesthetic political representation advocates autonomy for the representatives, drawing from disinterestedness, which itself is different from indifference. This one is talking about the difference, okay, between indifference and disinterestedness. This one is talking about difference between indifference and disinterestedness, but it is also mentioning the aesthetic political representation that has been presented before us here. Alright, so A option we will be disregarding here. Going ahead, disinterestedness as distinct from indifference is the basis of political representation. May or may not be true, but it is ignoring the aesthetic political representation, the concept of aesthetic introduced. So this will also be disregarded. Aesthetic political representation advocates autonomy for the representatives manifested through disinterestedness, which itself is different from indifference. It is saying that aesthetic political representation gives an autonomy which is manifested through disinterestedness. Okay. Nowhere in the paragraph aesthetic political representation is related to disinterestedness. It is only saying that, you know, it is a consequence of the same and not because it creates disinterestedness. So option number B would be the best call, and we will be going with this one. Parajumbles again. So now we are solving this one. As you can see, this only has single or double statements. So you should come naturally to this one first and not the other one, because that was a tricky part and you had to read a lot of content in order to figure out the configuration. Okay. Each person personified a different aspect of good fortune. The others were versions of popular Buddhist gods, Hindu gods and Taoist gods. 7 popular Japanese deities, the Shichi Fukujin, were considered to bring good luck and happiness. Although they were included in the Shinto pantheon, only two of them, Daikoku and Ibisu, were indigenous Japanese gods. We know that statement number C is the first because it is introducing 7 popular Japanese deities, right? Now we have to see which statement is next. Okay, 7 popular Japanese deities have been introduced. Then, okay, a quality, each one personified a different aspect of good fortune, has been introduced. So, A. Only 2 of them. First, only 2 of them have been talked about, and then each one, no, the others. First 2 are described and then the others are described. So, D would be followed by B, and CADB would be your configuration. Alright, let's move to the next question now. Okay, in this question, you are presented with 5 statements, and 4 out of these 5 statements, if formulated or they are in form of para-jumble, if you jumble them again, you will reach a coherent paragraph, and one of these statements is out of the idea or out of the original paragraph. So we have to figure out which one is that statement. The logic of displaying one's inner qualities through outward appearance was based on distinction between being a woman and being feminine. Alright. Appearance became a signifier of conduct. To look was to be, and conformity to the feminine ideal was measured by how well women could use the tools of the fashion and beauty industries. Okay, displaying and appearance, these two are containing the similar idea. The makeover-centric media sets out subtly and not so subtly good and bad ways to be a woman, layering these over inequalities of race and class. It's talking about ways to be a woman. Let's see if this sits well with the next 2 statements. The denigration of working class women and women of color often centers on their perceived failure to embody feminine beauty. Again, feminine and female, this coincides with the top 2 statements. Woman was considered a biological category, but femininity was a process by which women became specific kinds of women. Again, a comparison between woman and femininity was a process. So again, a comparison has been drawn between feminine and a female. So this will also sit. Out of these 5, I feel that C option is the one that does not sit well at all. And you will not have this much time in exam, but I will now try to jumble again statement A, B, D and E to find and make a coherent paragraph. So let's go ahead. The logic of displaying one's inner qualities through outward appearance was based on a distinction between being a woman and being feminine. Okay, this seems like a concept is being introduced, so I will keep this as the first statement. Now, this statement is defining this statement. So, I would say women was considered a biological. Yes, it is defining the difference between being a woman and being feminine. So, this E statement will come here. Now, this is also giving an example. This is also saying how feminine beauty is failing. This is saying how to look feminine. Okay, so B and D, because E is justifying A and D is showing a contrast that how that concept is failing in today's world. So this would be my paragraph, but this is not the answer. The answer required is which of these is the ugly duckling and does not fit between the statements. So C would be your answer. Let's go ahead. Okay, we have to find a summary for the paragraph. Let's go ahead. The passage, the dominant hypothesis in modern science believed that language evolved to allow humans to exchange factual information. about the physical world, but an alternative view is that language evolved in modern humans at least to facilitate social bonding. It increased our ancestors' chances of survival by enabling them to hunt more successfully or to cooperate more extensively. Language meant that things could be explained and that plans and past experiences could be shared efficiently. From the belief that humans invented language to process factual information, scholars now think that language was the outcome of the need to ensure social cohesion and thus human survival. Yes, okay, somehow it's covering the crux of the paragraph, so we'll consider this option. Most believe that language originated from a need to articulate facts, but others think that it emerged from the need to promote social cohesion and cooperation, thus enabling human survival. Okay, the dominant hypothesis, that means a lot of people believe it and most believe. This is sitting better than the statement number A. So, sorry, we'll consider this one. Since its origin, language has been continuously evolving to higher form. यहीं पे गलत हो गया. Continuously, ये तो कहीं लिखा ही नहीं है. Nowhere it has been said. Experts are challenging the narrow view of the origin of language as being merely used to describe facts and label objects to being necessary to promote more complex interactions among humans. Experts are challenging, no, it is not talking about a narrow or broader view. So, no, this will not be our summary. So, in my opinion, option number B would be the best summary for the given paragraph. Okay. Okay. When properly sequenced would yield a coherent paragraph. Decide on the proper sequences. Again, we have encountered para jumbles. Let's go and solve this. A, B, C, D. All right. The complex computational elements of the CNS are organized according to a nested hierarchic criterion. The organization is not permanent and can change dynamically from moment to moment as they carry out a computational task. Okay. Echolocation in bats exemplifies adaptation produced by natural selection. A function not produced by natural selection for its current use is exaptation. Feathers might have originally arisen in the context of selection for insulation. From a structural standpoint, consistent with exaptation, the living organism is organized as a complex of Russian matryoshka dolls. Smaller structures are contained within larger ones in multiple layers. The exaptation concept and the Russian doll organization concept of living beings deduced from studies on evolution of the various apparatuses in mammals can be applied for the most complex human organ, the central nervous system, CNS. Alright, so out of these four, it is understood that the CNS, the central nervous statement, is introduced in statement number D. So that is understood that D will come after A. Alright? Okay. And now if you were to go back to the sentences, you will see first there is a concept known as exaptation which is introduced here, right? And same consistent with exaptation, same exaptation is used here. Here it is telling what exaptation is, and then here it is making an addition to exaptation. So we know that C will follow B, right? And in the last statement, we also see that Russian doll example is referred to, and the Russian matryoshka dolls were mentioned in the statement number C. That means D follows C. So B, yes, B, C, D, A would be your configuration. Now a lot of you will get confused because the official answer key is not having this as the answer, it is having something else. But right now right before you I showed you how these 4 statements become coherent only with this configuration, and I don't think any different configuration is possible in this situation. Alright, going to the next question. 5 statements are given, 4 of them can be put together to form a coherent paragraph. Identify the odd one out and key in the number of sentence as your answer. You have to find the odd one, again the one that does not sit well with the rest of the 4 statements. Machine learning models are prone to learning human-like biases from the training data that feeds these algorithms. Okay, MLM. Hate speech detection is part of an ongoing effort against abrasive and abusive language on social media. Fine, it's talking about MLM, it's talking about hate speech. The current automatic detection needs models miss out on something vital. Context. It uses complex algorithms to flag racist or violent speech faster and better than human beings alone. Again, racist and violent speeches, this is sitting well with B statement, right? For instance, algorithms struggle to determine if group identifiers like gay or black are used in offensive or prejudiced ways because they are trained on imbalanced data set with unusually high rates of hate speech. Again, hate speech is here, it is relating with B. So, both D and E are related with B, and A and C are talking about some bias. Now, you might see this one as the odd one or this one, but I would say that statement number A is introducing the main concept. Besides hate speech, machine learning models are also introducing algorithms. An algorithm is something that is being talked about in all the other options except on C1, C option. It is talking about current automatic detection. So, C would be the odd one out. Understand? Yeah. So, now I will try to formulate, suppose this is not present, okay? This is not present. I will make a paragraph now. So, we know that hate speech detection is the topic. So, B would be the first sentence, right? Now, it uses complex algorithms. What is using complex algorithm? Machine learning models. Okay, that feeds okay. So, A will follow B. Now, no, complex algorithm, hate speech detection and then complex algorithm, because hate speech detection is using complex algorithms. So, no, A will not come here, A will not come here, D will come here. Then it is talking about these algorithms. So, A, and lastly it is giving the example that how the algorithm is failing. So, E, this will be your configuration, and that's how we have also solved the paragraph and made a coherent paragraph out of it. Okay. Alright, that was all, dear students. And lastly, we are introducing an All India Open Mock for CAT exam. Right before your exam, you can practice through this mock. You can register now. It is going to take place on November 10th. No, November 9 and 3 slots. That means morning, noon and evening, just like in CAT exam, slots are available. And I would say it's a good idea to go through this mock and see that how ready you are, and the mock analysis will also be available on YouTube. So at that moment you will know that on the D-Day, before the D-Day you will know the feeling of the D-Day. So please go ahead and register yourself for this mock, and that was all for today's session. Thank you very much.